your notes over the Korean War and the Vietnam War, which, as we've talked about in class, were both conflicts that happen as a result of the Cold War. So we're going to look at these two conflicts and kind of discuss how they related to the Cold War and how they kind of are kind of results of the Cold War. So first of all, we're going to talk about the Korean War, and basically it's a really quick war. In 1945, Korea is divided into a communist North and a non-communist South. And here's just a map here showing North Korea and South Korea, the separation. And in 1950, North Korea invades the democratic government of South Korea. And so the communist troops are eventually forced back into North Korea under a UN resolution, because the United States and other countries in the United Nations are going to be involved because they do not want communism to spread. This policy of containment is really going to keep the Korean War, keep other people involved. So the United Nations decide that they are going to call up an army of troops, and they're going to invade North Korea based on these aggressions. And this was led by General Douglas MacArthur. We know him from being a war hero in the Pacific in World War II. So Douglas MacArthur leads the United Nations troops into North Korea, and they are able to reach the Chinese border. So they are able to invade North Korea, reach the Chinese border, but at this point, China is going to intervene. Truman is going to refuse to use nuclear warfare on China to get them to ease up. Like we remember in World War II when nuclear warfare was used at Pearl Harbor. Well, Truman is not going to gamble with that again, even though the United States does have the capability to do that. They refuse to do that. And this war ends in a compromise in 1953, and Korea is left divided at the 38th parallel. So this line right here, the demilitarization line right here. So it's going to, Korea is going to stay split, and they're going to remain communist in the North, even to this day. So that is going to be the result of the Korean War. The United States was not successful in trying to, well, they were successful in trying to contain communism. All right, so let's move on to the Vietnam War, which was another war that was initiated on that policy of containment. So just to give you a little bit of background information, the Vietnamese are able to gain their independence from the French in 1954. And they are, the Viet Minh was kind of the communist coalition or the communist group that was there fighting up against the French. And so after they gain their independence, they are divided into North and South Vietnam at the Geneva Conference with intentions of holding elections to reunite them. But that never actually happens. Ho Chi Minh, who was a communist leader or a nationalist leader there in Vietnam, he is going to create the communist state in the North, and the South is going to remain tied to the West. So this is going to obviously create conflict because the North and South Vietnam are not going to be politically aligned. So the Viet Cong, or the Vietnamese communists, that's what they are referred to as at the Viet Cong, they're going to launch a war against the South Vietnamese government that is going to be put in place and tied to the West. Just something about the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong was the Vietnamese communists a lot of time living in South Vietnam who wanted the Southern Vietnam government to become communist. So that is going to be the roots of the Viet. All right, so the United States is going to step in. We know their policy on containment is to stop communism at all costs because they definitely believed in the domino theory. They believe if one nation fell to communism, especially in Asia, then others would begin to follow suit. And so this little political cartoon kind of describes it all. You have the Viet Cong pushing the dominoes and the United States is going to try and stop them. So they're going to start sending advisors, they're going to start sending planes, tanks, and military supplies to the South Vietnamese to try and combat the Viet Cong in the north, to try and make sure that South Vietnamese is not taken over by communism, and to try to take over the North Vietnamese government. While the United States had not been directly involved in the Vietnam War just yet, however, in 1964, two U.S. destroyers were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin, which supposedly was in neutral or non-Vietnamese waters. They are struck by two North Vietnamese patrol boats in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right here along the Vietnamese coast. And so after this happens, this was an act of aggression on the United States. President Johnson is given more authorization to send more troops and more aid to Vietnam. So many troops are sent. By 1965, you're going to have 165,000 men. By 1968, you're going to have over 500,000. So even though war had not technically been declared on Vietnam, troops were sent to kind of police this communism and to try and uphold that policy of containment during the Cold War. All right, so the United States gets involved in the Vietnam War, and they're going to face a lot of challenges once they get over there. It's never going to be a smooth war to be fought. First of all, they're going to face the guerrilla warfare. Vietnam is a jungle. They have lots of jungle, lots of trees, and they are going to, the Southern Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, are going to pose a guerrilla-style warfare on the United States soldiers. And the United States soldiers don't know the language, they don't know the geography, they don't know anything about Vietnam, and so they are definitely at a disadvantage to this guerrilla-style warfare that the Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong, is unleashing. In 1968, you have the Tet Offensive, which is basically the northern Vietnamese attack on southern Vietnamese. And this is going to be an extremely strong and brutal attack that's going to prove that this is an extremely harsh war and that the Viet Cong is very strong and they are going to fight. And it's known as the Tet Offensive. The Southern Vietnamese government is going to be extremely unpopular. They are not going to have much support except from the West. So the peasants and other farmers are going to be more sided with the communist government that's going in place in northern Vietnam. The Viet Cong is also going to get support from the Soviet Union and China, which are other communist superpowers there. And the war is going to be really unpopular in the United States. The United States citizens are not supportive of this war. They are not going to be like they were with World War I and World War II, where they're pitching in for the war effort. They're actually going to speak out in protest of this war and try to get troops brought home. So the United States, because of this guerrilla warfare and because of this jungle that they're very unfamiliar with, is going to turn to air power. And they're going to bomb lots of farmland and forest and parts of the jungle. And that is going to create more problems. But they're going to use things like Agent Orange and napalm, which are gases and different toxins and poisons to try and combat this Vietnamese guerrilla warfare. And this is actually going to strengthen the peasants' opposition to South Vietnam because they're going in and they're destroying their land. And so this is not going to make the United States war effort very popular with the South Vietnamese. So with all of these problems going on for the United States, you're going to start to see the United States withdrawing from Vietnam. War, like I said earlier, it's very unpopular. The United States government is not getting much popularity from being in this war. Like I said, protests were starting to begin. And in 1969, Richard Nixon, who becomes the president after LBJ, is going to roll out his plan called Vietnamization. And with Vietnamization, it's going to try and allow troops to slowly come home while maintaining strength in South Vietnam, not wanting to give up that strength, not wanting to relent and relent and withdraw from the war, but they also want to bring the troops home. So he's actually going to increase bombing. He's going to increase diplomacy, meeting with the Soviet Union and China, trying to negotiate peace talks, to try and hand over the war to South Vietnam for them to finish. He's gonna bomb North Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos because he's wanting to preserve that Southern Vietnamese government, and so he's going to take these drastic measures so he can start bringing troops home. United States troops were withdrawn from the Vietnam from Vietnam. By the end of the war, North Vietnam had come in and overrun South Vietnam. It renamed the capital Ho Chi Minh City. The casualties from this war, 1.5 million Vietnamese were killed and 58,000 Americans died during war. So this war was not necessarily successful in being able to contain the communism as the Americans had hoped to do during the Cold War. All right, so one result of America's failure to contain this communism in Vietnam is that this communism leaks over into Cambodia. After the withdrawal of American forces from Vietnam, the collapse of the Cambodian government happens in 1975. The Cambodian communists, known as the Khmer Rouge, they seized control of Cambodia, and their leader, his name was Pol Pot. He carries out this massive genocide, and we know that genocide is just mass murder against the people living in cities and anyone who was opposed to his rule. So he's going to kind of like Stalin with the Great Purge. He just carries out this genocide against anyone who does not agree with him or who is opposed to his rule, where the people were literally living in fear. So he carries out this genocide and kills almost 4 million Cambodians between 1975 and 1978. Pol Pot was eventually overthrown. However, Cambodia went through a time where they were under a communist brutal regime. All right, so let's do our quick check questions. How did the Cold War contribute to the start of tensions in Vietnam and Korea? And then I want you to tell me why these wars were not successful for America and why they weren't successful in helping contain